what's everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I am excited to be here today with another client interview for you guys. Today I have Sydney on with me, which Sydney is a total rock star, and she just finished her summer 2022 recruiting process and had a very good outcome, and I was very excited for her. But obviously, as usual, want to get some of our best clients on here to walk you guys through kind of their own experience with recruiting, and also just give you guys some advice on, what you might be able to do to be successful yourself as well. So, Sydney, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, I guess to start off, if you don't mind, maybe just introducing yourself a little bit so that people kind of get a sense for, who you are, what kind of candidate you were going into recruiting.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Sydney. I just finished up my sophomore year at the University of Pennsylvania in the Wharton School, originally from New York. So I guess you could say I have a pretty traditional investment banking background when it comes to the school I went to, as well as my major. I did finance. However, I definitely did not have that much finance experience before coming to Wall Street Mastermind. So that was definitely one of the biggest things that I needed help with.
Got it. So let's go back to the beginning, right? Obviously, I think you joined summer after freshman year. You joined Wall Street Mastermind summer after freshman year, which is a good time to join. But like, if I go back to our first conversation, I remember obviously you go to Wharton, it's one of the most financy schools you could probably go to. I remember you had a pretty good GPA, probably 3.75, 3.8-ish. And so on paper, you seemingly a lot of people will see that and say, why does someone like you even need help? Like you should probably be able to get in on your own, right? So like, what was it that made you want to join something like Wall Street Mastermind at the time?
Yeah, so I think it was definitely a few things. I think first and foremost, I definitely was not aware as to how expedited the process was for investment banking recruiting. I, as a freshman, thought, my job is years away. I don't have to worry about this at all. And I was in for a pretty rude awakening the July after my freshman year when I saw on LinkedIn all the people in my year applying to, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all these sophomore summer investment banking internships. And I felt very behind immediately because I haven't even thought about interning at a bank like that, or, even thinking about my future in that way. So I guess leading into the second thing, I started trying to figure out as much information as I could on my own, which was a really poor and not efficient way of doing it, which was like Google searches, YouTube videos, literally Googling intro to investment banking on YouTube and finding a video in which I learned about Wall Street Mastermind. Actually, it was like the depths of 3 a.m. And I was like, why am I learning barely anything from YouTube videos? And I came across the Wall Street Mastermind ad, and I was like, okay, this seems like something I should maybe consider, and ended up booking a call that way. And I think that after my call, I realized that there was so much I didn't know about the process. I didn't have any family that, was working in investment banking. My parents are both not in business at all. I didn't really have any of those like same finance tangible internships that I think a lot of people had. And so Wall Street Mastermind really helped me, connect what I think I was missing in the recruiting process.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. It's funny because people always think like, hey, I mean, if you go to I think people oversimplify things, especially on places like, if you go on Wall Street Oasis, for example, they'll say, oh, like as long as you go to this school and have this GPA, then you're in. If you don't go to this school and you don't have this GPA, then you're not, right? That's so far from the truth. There's so much more that goes into it. But also the irony of it is when you go to a school that's as good as Wharton, and it's like there's so many people that are determined to break into investment banking, and they send so many people into investment banking every year. In a way, the bar is actually even higher, right? Because the students at Wharton that I've seen anyway are just a lot more prepared than most of the students at probably 99% of the other schools. And so, for example, at some of the non-target schools, maybe if you only have one finance internship, you might be head and shoulder above the rest of your class. Whereas at Wharton, that's probably like the bare minimum. Like if you don't even have a finance internship, it's probably a non-starter, right? Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's decently accurate. I think what people don't realize is that, Wharton obviously is a place that a lot of people go into banking related internships, which means that almost everybody at Wharton, whether they actually end up in investment banking or not, has applied to investment banking at one point or another. So while yes, like you're in whatever like top target school, you are also somewhat competing with the rest of your class. Like there are still hundreds of other people from Wharton applying to the same job as you. They're not going to take 100 kids from Wharton. So you have to stand out from, I guess, an even more selective pack at that point. And yeah, a lot of people from that school come in with finance experiences and internships. Not everyone. Some people don't have business backgrounds. I most certainly didn't. When I went to the school, did some business related things, but definitely not the same kind of finance hardcore internship that a lot of people have.
Right. So like I'm looking back on your resume from when you first joined, and you basically, what you had going for you was you went to a good school, you had good grades, good SAT score, but what you didn't have was you didn't have any finance experience, whether it's work experience or extracurricular activities, or there's like nothing on your resume that suggested that you were even remotely interested in finance. Is that right?
Yeah, that was definitely a big problem. And I think that that's definitely something that this program helped me fix from the very beginning. I signed up for this program, I think in July. And by the end of the summer, I had a finance internship lined up for me starting September. And I did that during my fall semester of sophomore year along with school. And that is something that like this program was able to help me find.
Got it. Right. So one of the first things we had to do when you came in was get you some relevant experience so that we can not only add that to your resume, but more importantly, like give you something to talk about during the networking conversations and during the interview process and have something to point to, and also not have you, I mean, because a lot of times, look, if you don't have any relevant finance experience on your resume, what's going to happen is you can go out and try to network, but people are going to look at your resume and probably just throw it away because this person has nothing to do with finance, right? And so that's almost always the first hurdle that we have to help people overcome. Some people come in, they already have finance experience, but in your case, that was probably the biggest hurdle, at least in the beginning, right? And we were able to fix that pretty quickly, so that was good. You mentioned something earlier also. You said that you don't have any family in investment banking. Both of your parents aren't even in business at all. So what do your parents do? Like, this sounds like this world is completely foreign to them.
Yeah, they're definitely not in business. They're in healthcare. So definitely a very different part of the career
Yeah,
spectrum. So I think that, this program even helped them honestly get acclimated on what exactly I was going through and help them understand even the type of struggle it took to get into investment banking at all.
yeah. So I mean, let's talk about that for a second, because I think a lot of the times we speak to students and they want to join Wall Street Mastermind, but then the challenge is they have to then go and explain to their parents what is Wall Street Mastermind, why do they need to join something like Wall Street Mastermind, right? And most of the time, a lot of parents are like your parents, where they don't even know what investment banking is, or maybe they've heard of
Yeah.
it, but they don't really know like what's so special about banking, or why is it so difficult, or why can't you get this job on your own? I didn't have any help getting my job. And so like, how was that conversation with your mom or your dad, or like, was it difficult to kind of convince them that this was help that you needed?
Yeah, so luckily enough for me, actually, my mom is very good at doing her own due diligence when it comes to these things. I talked to her about it and said that, I scheduled this call off of this YouTube ad that I saw with this guy who's going to do investment banking coaching. And, I think both of our first thought was, is this a scam or is this
Right.
for real? Like, what is going on? Like, what did you
Right.
just sign yourself up for? And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to get on this call and if I have like a good feeling about it, like, I'll let you know and we'll talk about it then. And I think that that's what it happened. And I scheduled my initial call and I was like, okay, this guy seems legit. Like he seems to have had like a lot of experience getting a lot of people into investment banking. So like, let's check him out. And I think my mom honestly probably researched even more than me about this program, not only looking at the testimonials online, but, looking at some of the students that may have done the program and seeing, are they actually in those top investment banks that, people seek after, or did they just, fall off and not do anything after the program? And I think that having her, listen to all those really changed her mind. She actually also had a call with Sam in order to discuss the program more in depth. So that is also an option, I guess, if your parents are a little bit more on the fence. It is, a big investment to make, but I think that it is definitely possible to convince parents that it is a worthwhile one.
Right. So yeah, no, I remember having a conversation with your mom, and she definitely had a lot of questions. So I understand what you're saying about doing her due diligence. But I'm glad we were able to kind of like get her comfortable with this idea. And so you came into the program, and then like you already talked a little bit about, okay, so first thing we did was we had to help you get some relevant experience. So we did that, right? What else happened in the program? Like how did you go about it after you joined, and just kind of describe the recruiting process for you a little bit. Like, was it harder, easier than you expected? Like how did things go for you?
Yeah, so I think that the recruiting process was definitely harder than I expected. However, I felt like I was well prepared for it and definitely better prepared than most of the other kids, even from Wharton, that were recruiting. I think that one of the biggest things that stood out to me when I joined this program, or when I was talking about joining this program, is that it's not like you can't learn these things online. Like I'm sure you can if you spend enough hours on it, but it's just that like through this program, everything's so condensed and it's laid out for you in a step-by-step format. Like, exactly what you have to do. And at that point, everything's laid out for you. You have all the tools. It's really up to you to actually do it or not. And at that point, in my head, at least, it was like, it's my fault at that point if I like can't get it, because I just like have all this in front of me. Like I should be able to figure it out by then. So I think the two things that are the most helpful is definitely first the resume, at least for me, the resume building portion of it. It helped you turn a resume that maybe wasn't that finance oriented into one that really was. That's like highlighting all the relevant parts of all of your experiences and turning it into a format that's really well written and well formatted for bankers to read quickly. And the second and probably most important thing was definitely the technical interview help for me. Even coming from a program in which I learn a lot of finance and accounting, like in classes. However, the way that, it's presented in technical interviews is very different from the way that it would be tested in an exam. So I think that the technical interview prep was invaluable. And before each and every one of my interviews, I would go back and, listen to it on 2x speed once again, just to like do a refresher in my mind. And I think that helped me immensely, especially when so many of these interviews are technical only. And you have to, just rapid fire answer these questions.
So just to be clear, you're saying that even though you go to a school like Wharton, which has probably a pretty darn good, one of the best finance curriculum in the country. See, this is what I always try to explain to people and they don't really understand, which is the way that the accounting and the finance classes are being taught in school is not tailored to just like getting you the investment banking offer, right? Like your professors don't assume that, hey, every single one of my students in my class wants to get into investment banking. So that's not how they're teaching that stuff to you. Right.
For sure. I think that, it's not the same as it's taught in school. It's also in school, I feel like they do a lot to teach you for exams or, in a certain format that may be better for them. And don't get me wrong, Wharton has literally one of the best, if not the best, business curriculum in the country, but it's not taught in the exact format that people would be asking technical questions. Some of it is not taught, actually, it's not tailored specifically towards banking at all.
Right. You're actually not the first Wharton client that has said that to me. I at a Wharton, another girl from Wharton who said, she sent me a message. I still have it. She says, she watched that one training in our accounting module on like tying everything together. It was like a 2 hour long training. And she says, I learned more in those 2 hours than I learned in an entire semester of accounting at Wharton, which I was obviously very happy, but also very surprised to hear that. But I think it's not that they don't teach you accounting at Wharton. It's that, for example, when you take an accounting class in school, they're teaching you how accountants think about accounting, right? Like debit this, credit that. How do you balance a T ledger? And that never comes up in an investment banking interview, right? So it's more about knowing how to speak the language the way that bankers want to hear it. Because if you go into an interview, and a lot of students do this, you ask them to flow through the three statements, they start doing debits and credits. Right off the bat, you're going to get eliminated because they know that you have no idea what you're talking about. Right.
For sure. I don't know if you remember this actually, but in our intro call, you were like, how confident are you with accounting? And I was like, I mean, I got an A in accounting, pretty confident. And you asked me to flow through the three statements. And I was like, debit this and credit this. And you were like, that's not what you do.
Right.
And then that's like when I knew I was a little bit in trouble.
And that's so common though, right? That's so common. It's like, sometimes like you're a good student, you get good grades in school, like I said, and so it's not like it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking like, yeah, I already know what I need to know, right? But that's the problem, is like a lot of times we don't know what we don't know, right? And then so you need someone else to kind of point that out for you. So that's a great point. So I guess as you went through the recruiting process, I think the other thing that I want to highlight is like the like you said earlier, the timeline starts so early now, right? Like, because I think you got your first offer around when it was like pretty early, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was like first week of April, I believe. Yeah. Like of my sophomore year was my first offer, which was super early.
And that was like one of your first interviews, right?
Yeah, that was my very first super day like I ever did. And it started super early. And that wasn't even like my first like round of interviews. Like interviews started even before that.
Right. So your first super day, you got the offer, and we won't name names. We're not going to say which firm this is because you didn't take it, but that wasn't your, I mean, you really liked them, but like that wasn't like your top choice, right? And so it obviously, I think a lot of students run into this where, because the banks, they all have like different timelines, and some go a lot earlier than others. And so like, how did you go through like managing that process? Because that was probably pretty stressful, right? Like you have this offer kind of exploding, you have more opportunities lined up and more interviews that you still want to go to. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was honestly probably one of the more difficult parts of the recruiting process. You think a lot about getting the job, and then once you get the job, you realize that, there's a lot more than just getting the job. I mean, I think anybody who talked to me about it knew how much I love this bank and tried so hard to get this offer. And, you think so much about getting the offer that sometimes you don't realize that there's like an after in which you kind of have to make a decision. And honestly, I feel like this program, in a weird way, made me a little bit riskier when it came to that. I, got this one offer and I was like, okay, I think I can get other ones. And it made me a lot more confident that, I went through that interview process and I felt good about it. And I was like, okay, I think that I can maybe get other things. And I definitely did. Like I ended up turning it down, a little bit of a risky decision, but ended up turning it down in hopes of getting something else. And, in later May, things start heating up for, I think, a lot of other banks. And I think it was like 4 super days within like 2 weeks, and a lot more first round interviews because a lot of the banks started heating up all around the same time. And then that's when I like felt confident enough in myself. And I was like, okay, this is like many more opportunities that I have. Like, I can, feel good about not taking this and having the chance of doing something else. And, as much as, it hurt my soul a little bit to turn down that first offer because you work so hard to get it. And I did really, really like them. But I'm so happy eventually that I did, because I ended up getting an offer from one of the top elite boutiques, and I couldn't have been happier with that. Texted Sam right after I got my decision, and I was like, I'm literally sobbing in a restaurant right now. So I guess that's when
That was one of the best messages I've gotten, because yeah, it was because you sent a selfie and stuff, and I was cracking up. But no, but that's a great story too there, and I wanted to bring that up because so many students. It's unfortunate that the way the banks recruit now, they put so much pressure on the students, and they don't really give you much time, if any. And I'll give this firm credit. This first offer that you got, I'll give them credit. They actually did give you some time. They didn't force you to decide.
They gave me a lot of time and actually extended it even further later on. So I do give them some credit on that front. They definitely were amendable and flexible.
And I think part of that, I mean, look, and I know how much you love the people there, and because you were telling me, like, you really love this group. You're even considering taking the offer, and I think I was encouraging you to just continue to recruit, because I felt like, based on my assessment of where you were at, I felt like you could get an even better firm. Like, again, we won't name names, but I would say this firm is kind of like, let's call it, I don't know, upper middle market, maybe, right? It's like kind of thereabouts, right? I felt like you could definitely get like probably a upper bulge bracket or elite boutique firm, which you obviously ended up doing. But like you said, when it comes to managing exploding timelines and or exploding offers, it's a risk reward analysis of how risky is it for me to either accept this offer or turn it down, right? And sometimes a lot of people, they'll even take the offer and then renege on it, which, I won't give my opinion here on whether you should or shouldn't do that. I think that's a very personal decision. But I know with you, like, I think you had a lot of integrity and you didn't want to do that, right? You basically said, I'm not going to renege. I'm either just going to turn it down, or I'm going to just accept it and stop recruiting. And then, you ask them for extension, which in and of itself is a risky move, because sometimes I've seen people ask for extension and then they lose their offer, right? But the point being, though, the more confident you are in your ability to get more interviews, and the more confident you are in your ability to pass those interviews, the more bold it enables you to be in making these decisions, right? Like, if you're just happy to be here, or you're just happy to get even a single offer, you're probably not turning that offer down, right? But if you, like you said, like, you got 4 more super days and a bunch more first rounds, and like, then like, hey, and I've already gotten this offer, and that was only a first super day, so you could probably feel pretty good about your chances of getting at least 1 or 2 more offers, if not more, right?
For sure. I think one of the biggest helps of this program for me actually is, it really is like one-on-one help. Like, when I was struggling with this for a week, I would just message in the chat like nonstop, being like, I'm freaking out. What do I do? Right. But I think talking it out with people really helps you come to a decision. And I know we talked a lot about the risk reward, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for a lot of people. Turning it down and taking the risk, it probably isn't the smartest move in a lot of cases. But if you feel confident enough and if you have other options, then it probably is a good move for you.
Absolutely. You make a really good point there. It's case by case, right? Because I've also seen people who have done what you did, which is they turned down their first offer, and then it didn't work out. Like, they ended up having to recruit for a lot longer, and then they ended up with an inferior offer to the first one that they got. And I'm pretty sure they probably kind of regret, like, if they could go back and redo that, they probably would have done it differently, right? And so
for sure,
it comes down to like really knowing how strong you are as a candidate and where you're at in the process. And sometimes that's gonna, like, it's not accurate if you just self-assess. You need someone who's seen a lot more candidates and like seen what type of people get what type of offers. Like, we have a large sample size. We've placed hundreds of students into these banks, so we kind of have a pretty good idea of, hey, this is what it takes to get into the different tiers of banks, right? And so getting that type of feedback, I think, also then can give you more confidence to make the decisions that you need to make. That's ultimately, it's your career, and you got to do what's best for you, right? And I
For
think in this
sure.
case, you did do that, right? So did you end up like going through the last four super days or whatever, or did you like just like get the second offer and then accept it? Like I don't even know how many interviews you ended up going through, but
So I ended up doing, I think, two of the first, it was just based on timeline, like the order in which they did happen. I
right,
ended up doing two of the first rounds, actually three of the first rounds, one of which converted to a super day. I didn't even hear back from the other two because the firm that I eventually ended up signing with, their first round to super day to offer happened within 48 hours of each other. So, I didn't even have time to hear back from the other places. So I actually only ended up doing one of those four super days.
right,
Um, and then ended up just, signing a week after that or something like that.
right.
Um,
And the firm that you decided to sign with, like, why? What was different this time around? Because obviously the first offer you got, you loved the people, but obviously you still were struggling a little bit with whether to accept it or not. What was so different about this firm that you did ultimately accept that was like, it sounded like it was a no-brainer for you. Like you got the
it was,
offer,
yeah.
you were sobbing, and it was like you knew right then and there that this was the right one. Like, why is that?
For sure. I mean, there are so many banks, and I think that there are many of which I would have been like that with and super happy about. But I think that with this specific bank, it was a good combination. I really, really loved the people here also. I, met a lot of them through my interview process and thought they were great. Also, it's one of the top like banks in America. And I think that for anyone who would get an offer similar to that, it's very, very hard to turn down. I don't think most people would.
Right.
And I think like lastly, like the types of deals they worked with, were the top notch, like high caliber deals that you would read about in the news. And I think that as the first step in your career, you want as much finance experience as you can possibly get. And working on very high deal flow with the biggest deals is where you want to be, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a lot of great points here. I mean, because even within the elite boutiques, let's just be honest, like all the elite boutiques are very elite firms. If you can get into any of the elite boutiques, I think most people will be very happy and they're very hard to get into. But even within the elite boutiques, there are still tiers, right? Like there are like, and I would say the firm that you got into is probably at the the top tier of elite boutiques out there. So it's the cream of the crop. And so, like you said, what that means is, you know, they're going to be the most selective, which, usually that's correlated with prestige, right? They work on the best deals. They have the most deal flow and the biggest and the highest profile deals. You're gonna get the best learning experience. This firm specifically is also has the reputation of having one of the best cultures on Wall Street. Like I think a lot of their people actually stay at the firm long term, whereas most other firms kind of churn through their analysts, like people try to get out as quickly as possible, right? So the culture is great, the people is great, deal flow is great, and you get a great experience. Compensation is way above street, as far as I know from some of our other clients that have gone there as well. And so when you get an offer that checks all of those boxes, then there's really nothing to think about, right? But it's rare. It's hard to like kind of get something that gives you the best of everything, right? And I think in this case, this is really one of those rare instances where that did happen. So
For sure,
that
yeah.
that's obviously an amazing outcome. So huge congrats to you on that. I guess
Thank you.
one last question for you. If you, because looking back now on the recruiting process, given where you were when you first started and where you are now, I'm sure you learn so much and you know so much more now about really just what it takes to be successful in this process. What would you say is one piece of advice that you would give to other people now who are maybe like say they're just starting out in this process, they're listening to this interview, they're where you were a year ago, right? What's something that you wish that someone else could have told you that would have made your life a lot easier?
Yeah, for sure. I kind of think about this a lot because I think back to the beginning of my process and I was like, wow, I was actually clueless about anything that was going on in this industry. And I think my biggest piece of advice would be to honestly start as early as you can preparing, because, my sophomore fall, you're not exactly recruiting for your junior summer. You're not exactly recruiting for your sophomore summer either. So you're kind of in this in between gray area in which honestly you have a lot of time to figure it out and learn. And I was able to have free time and study these technicals and make sure I knew them well, and study behaviorals and make sure I knew them well. And when you start recruiting, like I was saying earlier, it's like one thing right after the other. You might have 4 super days in 2 weeks and you have no time to do anything but learn about everything you want to know about those banks. And you don't really want to be spending your time going through what is a DCF when you want to be learning about what bank do I actually like what am I going to say for why this bank. So getting started early on the fundamentals that's translatable to anything is really good. Also just to like actually talk to people about your process. That might be someone like Sam if you end up joining Wall Street Mastermind, but when I speak to people about this program, think that the biggest takeaway for me was not only just like talking to him, but there's so many other people in this program that are going through the same exact process as you. People I've never met in my entire life don't go to my school, but I met them through this program, some of which I still keep in touch with. And it's really helpful, honestly, to hear where other people are at in this process. You get so much more intel about, what bank is doing what at what time. And you are able to get a much better understanding of where you're standing with a lot of these places. And I think that type of knowledge is also invaluable.
I think that's a great point, which is, I think the point you made there is like putting yourself in the right environment and surrounding yourself with the right group of people who are all like-minded, very ambitious, hardworking, working towards the same goal. But not only that, a group of people who's going to be supportive and collaborative, because that's kind of what we have inside of Wall Street Mastermind. Like, I mean, you're in our Slack channel, so this. Like, people are always like answering each other's questions, whether it's technical questions, networking questions, timeline questions, whatever it may be. And so the other part of it too is also when you see other people around you who are playing at a certain level, that forces you to kind of like raise your own game as well. Because I'm sure
so
like you see some of the questions that people are asking in the technical question channel, and you're like, holy crap, I don't know the answer to that. And then you're like, now I gotta
all
go
the time. I
right?
learned so many technicals just by the questions that people would ask in the chat. Like someone would ask some crazy, absurd question and be like, I don't even know what half the words in this question mean. Like time to Google it or,
Right.
go through the module or something. But
Right.
it's really helpful. Also, a lot of the people in this program are super, super driven. Like they will do crazy networking like every single week. And I definitely was not doing that, nor had like the effort to do that at the very beginning. But I saw from other people like how many calls like they were doing a week. And I was like, okay, time to ramp it up. More
Right.
emails to send.
Right. And it's good to have people like that pushing you, right? Because it keeps you motivated. Like sometimes you feel like slacking off or procrastinating or whatever, and you turn around, you're like, well,
Exactly.
that guy's not slacking off, and I don't want him to take my job, right? So so no, that's why they say like, hey, you're the average, the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think like part of this program, like, yes, you get all the coaching you need from me and Edgar and the other people on the team, but also I think the other part that really is invaluable is just it's like being in a this huge intercollegiate IB feeder club almost, where everyone's getting these
Almost.
content, right? So anyway, that's awesome. Look, guys, if you've been listening to this and a lot of what we've been saying resonates with you, maybe you go to a pretty good school, but you know how tough the competition is. Maybe you start a little bit later. Maybe you didn't realize you want to do finance later than some of your peers, and you're feeling behind. You're looking for a way to just you're the type of person who's willing to do the work, but you just need a little bit of guidance to point you in the right direction and make sure that you're spending time on the right things. Then I want to encourage you to book a free strategy session with our team. Okay, what we do on these strategy sessions is we'll hop on a quick call with you. We'll learn more about your situation. It's that first call that Sydney was alluding to earlier, where we just kind of get a sense for where you're really at. What are your recruiting goals? What do you actually need help with? can we even help you with the things you need help with? Because sometimes we might not be the best fit, but if we can, then we're happy to walk you through what that might look like for you and how we think we might be able to help, right? And if not, hey, no worries. Like, we'll at least just give you a little bit of advice and tell you what we think you should do instead. Because quite honestly, like, not everyone's a good fit for the program, and we also don't take everyone, right? So if that sounds interesting to you, you can go and book this call by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you. All right. So with that said, Sydney, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I apologize for all of my technology issues and Wi-Fi.
No worries.
But thanks for hanging in there. And obviously, huge congrats again on
Thank you.
an amazing outcome. And obviously, you worked super hard, and you totally deserve it. And I look forward to seeing all the success that's ahead of you. And if there's anything else you ever need help with, don't be a stranger. Right.
Of course. Thank you so much. Great to be here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, that'll be it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. All right. Thanks. Talk soon.